Right. So our usual warm-up, gently swinging your arms, but just let yourself settle in. Let's get rid of that shadow. Nice, easy, fluid movement. But don't take this exercise for granted, because there's a lot that you can do and sort of consider while you're doing this. So one of the things I've been talking about recently is this idea of opposite movements, balancing movements, or however you want to think about it. And this is really an essential part of Tai Chi practice. So people sometimes say to me, when are we going to do the advanced exercises? And I say, well, you already have. And there are undoubtedly, there's more complex exercises, more challenging exercises, and so on and so forth out there. But that doesn't mean that they're necessarily inherently more advanced. Progression in Tai Chi really is associated with our growth of awareness. And so an exercise like this, which is so familiar to you, you probably sort of do it without even thinking about it, actually can contain all sorts of ideas and ways of moving and ways of understanding that, if you apply your attention to, can be taken into other exercises. So it's like listening to a piece of music. You can listen to a piece of music, like some bits of music I've listened to most of my life. But when I play them now, I don't hear them in the same way as when I was 25 or something like that. There's often something different in it, and I think that's true. I'm one of these people who's constantly rereading books, for instance, and so it's a bit different to the kind of slightly throwaway society that we live in, where you kind of buy something, use it once, and chuck it away because you've done that. There's a value in the depth, shall we say. So with this exercise, try to focus your attention just here, where your spine goes into your pelvis. And imagine somebody takes hold of your belt there and they pull you around. So this is the opposite movement to your arms moving. They pull you that way and your body turns that way, and they pull you that way and your body turns that way. If you do you play these little games, if you change how you're thinking about something, then sometimes, not always, and not always quickly, certainly, you will get a different feel, a different perspective on a very familiar movement. So we can look at this exercise and we can go, oh right, I'm going to do this. Or we can look at this exercise and say, well, I'm going to imagine that movement there, and the feeling in the arms will change. So I've been talking about that a bit, and we've done things like polishing the table and rowing a boat and those kind of exercises. I've talked about the importance of those opposite movements. Feel free to ask questions about that, but sometimes you need to kind of work with these things a little. And then we can relate that also to what we think of as the range of movement, how far we're moving. So this is a question that comes up quite often in Tai Chi, because what we want to do is, if I've got a movement, if somebody's, imagine that person pulling me around, but my arms are going that way, eventually they'll start working against each other. The pull in one direction will be antagonistic to the pull in the other direction, and there'll be a straining and a stiffening. That's not what we try and do in Tai Chi. If you think what we're looking for in Tai Chi is some kind of harmony between, if I come closer so you can see the Tai Chi symbol there, the yin yang symbol, and they work together. They don't work against each other. They're not in opposition to each other. They're in harmony with each other. Tai Chi, that's the Tai Chi symbol. So Tai Chi is the martial art based on those principles. And therefore, if you're creating a tension, a disharmony, then you stop doing Tai Chi. This is in contradiction to, say, for instance, an exercise form where you might be stretching out. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. It's just it's not what we're doing. Our focus for attention is quality of internalized movement, a flowing movement. And this relates Tai Chi not only to the martial arts, but to the Chinese healing arts as well. So you can only go so far before you cross the line into disharmony, into tightening. Excuse me. This is why I sometimes talk about the posture and getting the posture right being akin to tuning a musical instrument. And if you've ever tried to tune a guitar or a violin or something like that, you've got to get it just right. You see some musicians seem to spend more time tuning their instrument than playing it. Because no, too tight, no, they've got to get it spot on. Too tight, too slack, and you don't get the note. So that's quite interesting, because if you get a guitar or a violin or something like that and just tap it very, very gently, very light at one end of the string, the vibration will go all the way up and down the string and probably into the rest of the instrument, provided it's in tune. If it's not, it's less likely to do that. So one thing that this appropriate range of movement and the harmony between movement in one direction and movement in the opposite direction offers you is this quality of Wu Wei, of moving with a very different type of effort. 4 ounces moves 1,000 pounds. We only need to strain when parts of our body are working against each other, or where we've got some kind of exterior force that we're having to strain against. And even then, in the case of the exterior force, we don't necessarily have to strain, because the Tai Chi strategy is to soften. And all this time, your arms are being moved. And so long as you have this idea that you're not going to create a tightness in the body, they'll move in the appropriate direction. And then just raising your arms a little bit. This is a good example of what I'm talking about. I know somebody who's a physiotherapist and also a Tai Chi player. They talk about there being two boundaries of movement. There's the soft boundary, and if I come closer, carry on, but there, my shoulders dropping down. I can feel it in my arms, but there's no tightness there. That's the soft boundary. There, suddenly everything's stiffened up. There's no more movement. My shoulders tight. That's the hard boundary. We work in Tai Chi always to the soft boundary, because the hard boundary, again, carry on, but I'll just show you, there is fine. But watch what happens. As I reach out there, can you see my body leaning over? I'm kind of falling over because I've gone to the hard boundary. So if, for instance, you find that in some of the exercises you get a little bit unstable, then one of the very common reasons for doing that, for that happening, is that you've overextended. So don't think about how far you should be moving your arms. That's the wrong perspective. Try and get a feeling of your arms being moved for you. So standing with your feet parallel, and we sink down and we push up. Now there's several ways we can think of this movement. When we sink down, gravity pulls us down, and eventually the pressure in our legs overcomes the pull of gravity and we go up. It's like if you get a ball and you push it down into water, eventually it becomes too much like hard work to push it down, and it's easier just to let it come up. So you don't force yourself down, you allow yourself to go down until you feel that push, that energy coming up from the legs. In the other direction, as you go up, you can think of two things. when you go up, your feet are pushing down, so that's your opposite movement. And if I keep going up like this, then eventually I'm straining in my calves, I'm straining in my back. So what I want to be aware of is how far I can go before I start to get a sense of that straining happening. And then I just allow myself to go down again because it's gravity pulling me down. The other way of thinking of this, which relates to this as well, is that the pull of gravity overcomes the upward momentum. Either way, if your question is, how far should I move? I'm sorry, but it's the wrong question. The question should be, what is happening within my body? What messages am I getting from my body that's telling me that it's time to change direction? So you become very sensitive to these changes within the body. Again, I'm going to come closer. Your hands are by your sides. You want your fingers just spread out a little bit, reasonably straight with a very slight curving. And imagine you're standing with soft mud either side of you. So as you sink down, your fingers are being pushed into the mud, and there's a slight compression in the arm as a result. And as you come up, you're pulling your fingers out of the mud, and there's an extension in your arm as a result. And if you can also feel the same compression and extension in your spine, they're very much comparable movements. And again, what we don't want to do is to get to a point where we're kind of having to tug on the arm or really having to force the arm down. So if you can feel this, it should tell you, well, I won't tell you, but it will inform what's happening in the next exercise. You just bring your hands around here, and that expansion in the body pushes your elbows out. Again, you don't have to think, how high do my arms go? The only measure really here is you don't want them to go above your shoulders, because your arms are moved by these internal forces within the body. It's like if you were in the sea, just floating on the waves would push you up. You wouldn't have to decide how far to go up because the wave is moving you, and then it would just lower you down. You wouldn't have to think, well, how far down should I go? Because the wave will pick you up. So concentrate on that wave-like movement within your body rather than thinking, what do I do with the arms? You've all done enough of these exercises, and you've done this exercise enough not to have to think too much about the structure, the choreography of what the arms are doing. So you have this opportunity to really take your awareness inside. So you no longer have to think, how far should I move the arms? Because the answer is there within that movement, that harmonious movement within your body, moving your arms for you. We make these sort of judgments all the time. Apparently surfers do this all the time. I've never really been surfing, so you know, they don't lay there in the sea thinking, right, in 10 seconds I'll be able to crest the wave. They feel the wave, apparently, so people have told me. And you know, crossing the road, you don't, you know, have you ever noticed you walk along with a friend and you know you've got to cross the road, and suddenly they've crossed the road and you think, should I cross the road? And if you have to ask the question, the answer is no. But if you're used to crossing the road, which most of us are, then you think, oh right, you know, you just know when it's the right time for you to cross the road. Now, changing into the wild goose. What we start to get is this really interesting quality, which is that our arms seem to be just being moved by some kind of what can come across almost as a kind of magical force. some kind of exterior force. And actually, it's just this combination of mind and body and movement really working for you. It can feel as though your arms are being moved by something, and this is that quality of wave that lies beneath the surface. Not effortless, but a very different type of effort to the way that we might normally think we had to try and move the arms. Now change into parting the clouds. Body expands and contracts. This is a rhythm that is constant. And with these exercises at the moment, we are actively using the hips to drop down and to push up. But whether or not, we don't do that in all the exercises, and yet there is still a downward and an upward movement. There is still an expansion and a contraction. So now change into dragon plucks the stars from the sky. If you want to follow up that aspect of it, start off this exercise with that same movement in your hips. Feel the wave coming up from your foot, through your leg to your hip, through the side of your body to your ribs, and then receding back down into your foot. And then push down through the foot again on the other side. Feel the wave coming up. Follow the movement up carefully through your body. And when you've got that sense of that wave, very slowly make this up and down movement in your hips smaller until it pretty much disappears. So in the end, you can do this. You can see my hips aren't raising and lowering, but they are still being pulled down, and I'm still yielding to that. I'm not standing like this. That would stop the movement. So there is still within the body that downward and upward movement. So the expansion and the contraction are still there. How far should you move your arm? It's your arm. It's the movement within your body moving your arm. It's your mind being aware of what is going on. So work it out from there. There are certain principles. We never lock the joints. We never want that feeling of stiffening, of straining. We don't want to lose the suppleness, the elasticity of our body. We don't try to make the movement bigger. We let the movement make itself bigger. In the same way that water running down a hill will gradually erode the soil. There are some things we can do, but not necessarily in this stance. Now, changing and just the first and the last of these movements. So there was a question asked the other day about how far do I move the arms out? The answer is you don't. You don't push the arms out. Because if you think of pushing the arms out, you'll start doing something. It'll become like a bench press or something like that. What's happening is that movement within your body, the expansion and then the contraction, are moving your arms out. And one of the key principles that we work to with this understanding of yin yang is that sooner or later, yin changes to yang, yang changes to yin. The wave coming into the beach will eventually draw back. You throw a ball up in the air, eventually it's going to come down. These are kind of regarded as universal principles. So all you have to do is make sure that you're not pushing your arms out, and that natural rhythm in your body that we're becoming so accustomed to will move your arms exactly the right amount. But if you start trying to push your arms out, you'll override that. And you'll create a stiffening, a tightening. You'll lose that sense of internal harmony. Or you'll plant the seeds of losing that internal harmony. So this time, with that same care and attention, and in the turn. Now, turning as well is a process that could very easily throw us off that harmony. You turn too far. So it might be that today you're not moving as far as you did yesterday, because there's all sorts of factors that will affect that. If you twisted your back a little bit, if you kind of stiff, you've got a bit of a stiff back today, then you shouldn't be trying to move as far as you did yesterday. Or maybe yesterday your back was a bit stiff, but today it's a bit looser, and you'll just, if you apply these principles, you will just naturally move a little bit further. We're not robots. We don't perform equally from day to day. We vary for all sorts of complex reasons. You don't need to understand what those reasons are in terms of Tai Chi. You just need to be aware of their consequences and what their effect is on your body at any one particular time. Now changing again. So this is one of the reasons why we have these routines. I do vary the movements, but also I always start with the same little routine, because we don't have to think about what's he doing with his arm and so on and so forth, and we can focus internally. This is progression in Tai Chi, doing the same movement differently. And then if it's comfortable, you add the turn. And then switch sides. You don't even necessarily get the same response on both sides of your body. Sometimes you will, but not always. So this brings up another element to this whole process, which is of being aware of what is happening within the moment. This is something that relates to meditational arts like mindfulness, from one moment to the next. And that brings its own benefits for mind and body. Not the whole story in Tai Chi, but it is an important part of it. So you add the turn. rowing a boat in the middle of the lake. This is not your head and shoulders going forwards. It is your hips going back. It will be quite difficult to push your hips back and not have your head and shoulders go forwards. Well, you could do it, but it would be an awful strain on your back. So you push your hips back and you think, oh, I might as well do rowing a boat because I've done 90% of it already. One more time. Then we make the change to polishing the table. You come up, your hands are in front of your hips. You feel that pull at the base of your spine again. Don't lift your hands up. You're taking, you're tilting forwards. That's pushing your hands out. Your hands really were on a table, as long as they weren't sticking to the table. What would happen as you did this is that they'd be pushed forwards and then pulled back. You don't even have to think about sort of your hands going forwards. It's all from that movement in your hips. One more time on each side. And then just come to standing. A couple of slow, gentle breaths. Relax your shape. Good. Fine. One of the things that maybe sort of like stimulated me to thinking about this was recently teaching a face-to-face class, a physical class, and there was somebody there with quite a disability, cerebral palsy, and they're doing really well, but their movements can be a bit unstable at times because of their physical condition. And I took them into hitting the ball in front of the shoulder. There's quite a lot of frail people in the group, so I wasn't even raising up the heel. I was just doing this. And I was watching them, and they were doing quite well. And I was looking around the room, and suddenly this person who was doing this before was doing this and going and wobbling all over the place. So I stopped them and I said, there wasn't the only one doing it. And I said, why are you doing that? Why would you, when you've got this lovely movement going and it feels nice and smooth and flowing and so on and so forth, why would you go to there and risk falling over? It makes no sense. But it's as though we have this, it's as though we have something to prove almost. Now, there might be times when you want to increase your range of movement. So how would we do that? So I might, for instance, take a wider step. So if I wanted more movement for hitting the ball in front of the shoulder, let's do hitting the ball in front of the shoulder. And so just rather than talking about it, moving your weight from side to side, first of all, with that little bit of a turn. And again, you can think of that counterbalancing movement. Somebody sort of like pulling you across and doing this to you, pulling you around. But actually, it would be this, wouldn't it? But you get the idea. And your hands just following the movement. Gradually, as you settle into the movement, you'll find there is a natural extension of the range of your movement. But there are two ways that you could work to extend the range of your movement and keep it as Tai Chi rather than something else. I don't know what really. One way is to, as you go across, this is about as far as I can go in this position. But if I sink down more, oh look, my arms move more. My arms move more because I'm working a lot harder in my legs. I didn't even have to try and do that. My hand gets to there. I can't turn any further. But as I sink down more, my arm just naturally moves more. Effectively, what I'm doing is getting more movement, not by straining, but by letting my hip drop more, by relaxing to allow my hip to drop more. The other way you could do it was, as I did before, you could also take a slightly wider stance. So if you want your arms to move more, you have to work harder in your legs. So two very common comments in Tai Chi, particularly in Tai Chi forms. One is, I can't see what your arms are doing. To which my answer is generally good, because it's not my arms I want you to watch. Not until you've got used to the movement. The other is, my legs are really aching. To which my answer generally is good, because it means that you're working in the right way. And these are the qualities, or some of them anyway, that build into things like this internal strength and so on and so forth that I've talked about before. This is the progression in Tai Chi. Some of the best Tai Chi players I've come across don't do anything like the amount of the number of exercises that I do. In the repetition. The awareness that builds with that we find the real progression. One more time. And shake out. The interesting thing was that yesterday I stopped them and I went through all this with them, and then they started up again and they went back to doing it really well. So that's quite interesting, isn't it? Because a couple of minutes of me moaning at them and they did it differently. That's not a physical change that we're talking about. Our bodies don't change physically that quickly. But what does change is our mind. And I've noticed this in classes again and again, to the extent that I almost look for it in some classes. I look for the opportunity to stop them and moan at them to focus their attention differently. And if I can do that, if I can get them to change how they're viewing an exercise, then how they're doing the exercise physically will change. Let's do swimming dragon, shall we? We haven't done that for a little while. So start off with in the hip width stance. Remember, this is quite a stretchy exercise, so go very carefully. Be careful, knees, hips, back, and so on and so forth. So it's just this tilting, and again we see the opposite movement. I'm exaggerating, and I've gone out of line, but you see my hips gone that way, my shoulders have gone that way. And remember that what we're looking for is this very smooth curve through the body. Feel free to keep your feet apart if that's easier for you. But if I bring my legs together, which is the traditional way of doing this exercise, then you'll see that there's a curve there. You've got to be really careful with that. When we did polishing the table, we did a horizontal circle one way and a horizontal circle the other way with the hips and pelvis. Now we're doing a vertical circle one way and then a vertical circle the other way. So it's still a circular movement around the center of the body, the lower down chin, but it's vertical, not horizontal. It's a bit harder to pick that up. 3 down chins, lower, middle, and upper are the ones that are going to be moving around. So hands together, the hands move in the same direction as your shoulders. Don't lean forwards or stretch downward to go underneath the belly. Drop your hips down as far as possible. If that doesn't get your hands comfortably underneath your belly, then that's fine. Don't worry, just get them as low as you can. Don't strain in your shoulders, which is quite tricky because it's a tricky movement. Watch from the side as I go for that lowest point. Here, my hips have just sunk down. My arms are well within their range. But if I try and push downwards, I'm going to pull on my shoulders. So I let my hips go back to get down below this. And I come up again. Feeling the connections from hips, the lower down chin, down through your legs and up through your upper body. Now changing direction. If it's straining your shoulders to go above your head, then if you can't sort of like drop your shoulders to do that, imagine somebody leaning on them. Try that first of all. But if that doesn't work, then don't go that high. Any kind of stretching that takes place, I would define as soft stretching. So extending out, pulling out rather than really going for a big stretch, which, as I said, can be a valuable thing to do, but not in this exercise, not in Tai Chi. Yoga is the best thing for good stretching. Good. And shake out. Lovely. 1 foot forwards. Transferring your weight. So one of the problems is that a lot of these movements are hidden movements. And I've talked about these, the rotation within the lower down chin. And here, there is still a rotation. It's a vertical rotation forwards and backwards, or part of a rotation. But you don't see me doing this because it's internalized. There will also be a horizontal rotation here, because what will happen is, as you go back, your back foot is turned out, So your body will naturally start to swing around. But actually what we're trying to do is to keep looking forwards. So essentially, we're doing this and then this. But we're doing it at the same time, so you don't see the rotation. But you might be able to feel it. And if you can't feel it, just keep doing this exercise until you can. It's not it's not complicated, these ideas. The information is all there for you to absorb. But what we're going to do now, actually, you go back and you just make that rotation a little bit bigger. You want to be a bit more explicit about it. You'll see why. Because now, as I go forwards and I turn, this hip is now moving that way. And if I imagine it, well, I don't know if you imagine, it's attached to my heel and it raises the heel. And I come back. Now, this hip, my front hip, is going to go that way. And I imagine a piece of string from my hip to my toes and lift it up. So that rotation, whether it's large or small, and we're doing it large, will actually help you move your feet. And in doing so, more of your weight will settle down, and eventually you can just take the step. This is this principle of Wu Wei in action. We don't strain to hold ourselves upright, to balance, or to move the leg. We just feel those connections, we feel the rotations, those internal movements, and we let them do the work for us. The flow of the movement in Tai Chi is a direct consequence of that approach. And then on the other side, so first of all, keeping your body as much as possible, looking straight ahead. Nice and easy and gently. And then just picking up on that rotation and going a little bit further. So now you're angling the body. This, of course, is the movement that we use when we go into Wind Blows the Willows, which we're going to be doing in a few moments. And then raising your toes and your heel. So we've got a horizontal rotation going on. We've also still got that vertical rotation. I think there's a third plane. I don't think there's anything really happening in that at the moment. Stepping in. And then pushing forwards or backwards, depending on where your space is. And go in the other direction. and shake out. So one of the other things that people will sometimes say to me is they're having trouble because they can't coordinate. And I always say, well, good, because we don't try and coordinate. If you think about it, something like, say, wind blows the willows, or even dragonfly skims the water, isn't a lot of different movements. It's one movement, it's this. Everything comes out of that. So there's nothing to coordinate because it's you, one unit, which is you, mind, body, and energy, moving. Or at least that's what you want to move towards. I realise it's not that straightforward. But really what I'm trying to encourage you to do is to reframe the question. Yeah, and you know, if you ask, well, how do I coordinate the arms with the legs? Then I don't know, because I don't try and do that. And I don't think it's a particularly helpful question. So think about what's going on and think about a different question in a sense. And then going into fisherman cast the net. I suspect this is why they say in Zen Buddhism that the question is the answer. So often I've found that if I can arrive at the right question, I don't need to ask it anymore. And I do ask questions about things. So I'm not shy of asking questions. I think it's an important part of it. So I'm not suggesting don't ask the questions. But quite often the answer is in this reframing of the question. Fisherman cast the net. So all of this should encourage a really strong focus of attention here. The lower down chin, the area from hips to navel, includes the pelvis. That's the area that's dropping to the ground. That's the area that's coordinating the movement, shall we say. I mean coordination in terms of governing the movement. A change into pushing away. Again, the question shouldn't be how far do my arms go forwards? The question should be at which point does it feel appropriate for my arms to go back? When we've reached that point where, if you like, the energy dissipates. And then wind blows the willows. Heel and toes coming up. Coming up because you've made that connection from the middle of your body down into your feet. And therefore, the step naturally follows on from that. There's always, you can develop this in different ways. Don't do this if it makes it feel sort of like unbalanced or wobbly, but you can raise the leg. but you need to make sure that you really settle down in the supporting leg if you're going to do that. And if you do this, if you sink down enough, if you're stable enough, you'll find that after a while, without straining, don't stiffen up in the hip that's doing that corresponds to the leg that's rising up. And eventually your leg will go higher. But if I do this, if I think, right, I'm going to pull the leg up and I do this, I fall over. Okay. Now, on the other side, starting with fisherman casting there. And pushing a wave. Even this one, if you think of pushing a wave, you can create a bit of straining. But Chinese language is interesting. It doesn't have terms like a and things like that. So, rather than pushing a wave, this could be pushing wave. In other words, the wave that does the pushing. And then wind blows the willows. Raising heel and toes. As always, if doing this bit of it throws everything else off, then don't feel obliged to do it. Give yourself time, work on the basic principles, and eventually it'll work out. But if you want to, just bringing the foot in, raising up if you wish. And it's not a competition, not even with yourself. Perhaps especially not with yourself. Some days it will work better than others. I sometimes think that if I'm trying to do an exercise like this and I'm wobbling around a lot, it's my body trying to say to me, don't do this today. You don't need to do it. And we really should listen to our bodies when they say things like that. And shake out. So, just rubbing your hands together. And tapping over your face. over your head and your back, shoulder, and your arm. Side. Your back. Around your hips. Legs. Flat on your belly. The upper part of your chest. So this quality of listening, this focusing of our attention into this moment, again, mindfulness, if you like to think of it like that, to use one possible term, is really essential in all these processes. If your mind is going off somewhere else, imagine somebody's talking to you and they're saying that, I'm sure we've all had this experience when they're talking to you and they say, so what do you think? And you go, oh, sorry, I was miles away, because your mind has drifted off. So the focusing your attention that we started off with is absolutely essential. And when we hear the phrase first in the mind in Tai Chi, we're not talking about the mind controlling the body. We're talking about the mind quietening and listening to the body so that it can cooperate with it. And that's very important. We use the term listening in the Southern Indian martial art called Kali Parat, very old martial art. They have a phrase, they say, the body becomes all eyes. Grandmaster Chen Xiaowang tells us to look ahead and listen behind. They're all ways of just describing this sense of awareness, both within your body and an awareness of your broader environment. So you could think about returning to the mountain as, in a way, coming back just to that state of listening. It's one aspect of it. So sinking down and embrace tiger, return to mountain. And shake out. Lovely. Thank you very much. Hope there was something in there, some more babbling to amuse you and interest you.